Thank you very much, Lisa Beyer. You do give as good as you get. And then some. Just to begin the discussion, I was fascinated by everything that you said. I need to meet Felsie, I think. I would like to know her. You said and then moved on quickly, and I, for one, would be interested to have you expand on it a little bit. You said you always feel or have felt more Christian, I believe you said, in Israel than ever in America. Would you say a little more about that, if you don't mind, or a lot more? No.
Hello?
Would somebody buy these people some batteries?
Yeah, I didn't originally mean to say that, and I just kind of stuck it in because Sherman said 45 minutes. Because it's a difficult topic to talk about. What I learned, there were two levels on which I felt increasingly Christian. And I have to say, although I wouldn't have titled this subject being a Christian among Jews, for all of my life, when I had to fill out a form about religion, I would check none. Now, I sometimes check Christian, and I'll tell you why. For one thing, it's unacceptable in Israel to be none. The very first Seder that I went to, the host was a very prominent Israeli diplomat, and he said, you know, Lisa, what are you religiously? And I said, I don't practice a religion, and that was completely unacceptable. He said, well, what is your mother? What are your parents? And I said, well, I was raised by a single mother, and she's an atheist. He said, well, what are your grandparents? And I said, they're all Catholics. And he said, you're a Catholic. So part of it was just sort of being beaten down by the system. Part of it was feeling, as I described, fundamentally different. Feeling that I wasn't what everybody else was. And so what was I? It's hard to identify yourself as a Gentile, since that's a non-something. You sort of need to be something. But on the more substantive level, what I found in Israel, and I don't think that this is true among American Jews, it's true among Israeli Jews, it's true in the Middle East, is that I missed Christian ethics. I missed the concept of forgiving. I missed the concept of, I mean, it really comes down to that. I got tired of the notion that if you hit me, I hit you back. And you just don't hear in conversations, and I heard a lot of conversations as a political correspondent between, you know, Arabs and Israelis, any sense of that, any sense of, well, let's get beyond, you're hitting me, I can forgive you for that, let's move on. And I think that that's a value that I learned I had absorbed, and it's fundamentally a New Testament value.
Well, a lot of people bought my book here, I'm very glad to say, in which it makes it very clear that the forgiveness and everything that goes with it is really Jewish values. Because the guy who was credited with saying all that was, like his mother, as you have pointed out, Jewish.
Right.
Derek. Oh, well.
I realize I should have been, no, it's not on. I realize I should have been evasive when you asked that question, just like you did to the control people at Ben Gurion Airport. My question's about language. The relation between language and religion, because you were living in Israel for a long time, and there's a pretty good-sized group of journalists and academics and clergy in Israel who are not Arab and not Jewish, and who live in the country a long time. They learn Hebrew, Arabic, both. Zev mentioned that you speak to each other sometimes in Hebrew. And I was just wondering, I've noticed that in Israel, yeah, there's the question of whether you're Gentile or Jewish. There's also the question of what language you speak with people in. And that, you know, people will tell me sometimes you're better off speaking in English because people will think you're such an outsider, they'll have to be nice to you. Whereas if you speak in Hebrew, they think you're one of the tribe, and then they can be rude to you the way they're rude to each other, because they're just treating you like family. And I've also noticed that there's a kind of a cognitive dissonance in Israel about what to do with the Hebrew-speaking Gentile. I've seen this in the Jerusalem Report in really good articles about, say, the children of the former soldiers from the South Lebanese Army who were living in northern Israel. And first of all, they look like Israeli Jews. they speak fluent Hebrew. And the article will always talk about that, chattering away in fluent Hebrew, but they're not Jewish. What are we going to do about it? Or people who came in from the former Soviet Union under the law of return, but who were themselves not Jewish, and then they marry other people who aren't Jewish. So there's this whole kind of non-Jewish subculture of former Soviet Union immigrants who, again, they're fluent in Hebrew. And so there's this problem in Israel, what to do with the Hebrew-speaking Gentile. And I was wondering if you or the people you hung out with dealt with this issue.
Very few journalists in Israel speak enough Hebrew to interview in it. So it never came up, it rarely came up in a professional context. The only time I can remember it coming up was when David Levy was the foreign minister in Israel, and his English, well, he spoke no English. Right. And there was a Washington Post correspondent who spoke Hebrew enough to interview him in Hebrew. Generally, the people that you deal with on the Israeli side, certainly on the official level, would generally speak better English than any journalist spoke Hebrew. And so English would be the default position, and certainly that was the case for me. The times when I needed to have a translator when I was dealing with Israelis was when I was dealing with Russians, who were relatively new to the country and didn't speak enough Hebrew or English, rarely any English at all. So you'd have to bring somebody who could speak Russian and English. The issue arises on the Arabic side. Very, very few journalists speak any Arabic, apart from, hello, thank you, you're welcome. And it's actually somewhat discouraged, because if you do begin to speak with any level of fluency in Arabic, the Arabs will think that there's something suspicious about you. That if you would have taken that much time to train to speak in Arabic, which is much harder to learn than Hebrew, much harder to learn than probably most languages, that perhaps you were trained by the CIA and that you're doing something more than journalism.
David, he needs a mic.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, I think the issue Derek raised is a very interesting one, actually, in terms of Israeli identity. And there was this big controversy when the Palestinian Arab Israeli Anton Shamas wrote his novel in Hebrew, and was accused by some of de-Judaizing the Hebrew language, a very unfortunate term because it has historical resonance. It's not very pleasant. But I actually want to make an observation, listening to Lisa and to Zeb, about language that we all use. We refer to Gentiles. I think the only other people in America who use the term Gentiles are Mormons. And, this is not, we've sort of adopted, invented this term Gentile. It's not really a term of use in America. And what we really mean is non-Jews. And of course, we're the only ones who divide the world into Jews and non-Jews. And, and I find this actually in my teaching that I have a problem. I want to speak about like I'm teaching now, of course, in the Holocaust, and I want to talk about Germans, but of course, the Jews were also Germans in Germany. And so you can't just say Germans, so you say Christian Germans. Well, that doesn't really work. The Nazis really weren't Christians. So you say non-Jewish Germans. And so you're caught in this funny language trap and I don't think we've exactly figured out the way out of it.
At one point, when Zev was getting very, as we were deciding to get married and making these preparations for getting married, I think he found himself very kind of on my side and always on the lookout for people making nasty remarks about Gentiles. And for a while there, he would call himself a non-Gentile.
Just a comment on the use of the word Gentile. I have a sister in the real estate business up north, and she was pondering on an old, well, not so old as all that, about a 25-year-old deed or title thing, and she kept running into the code GO, and she finally found someone who could explain to her what GO was, Gentile only.
I'm the new girl on the block because I didn't get to hear the whole panel, but I think what I was interested in this conversation, and it's come up in the comments already of a few others, is how multiple the aspects of identity are. And I was interested, Lisa, that in your talk at one point you commented on the phrase that the secular humanists, I don't know if you want to call it liturgy, uses, or came up in the thing last night, the more Judaism, the more humanism, and you found that hard to take in some fashion. So I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little about it, particularly, and I'm linking this up to this issue of multiple identities because both of you talk about how different aspects of your awareness and identities have come up when you've changed context. You've come, Lisa, when you're in Israel, you talk to these nuns that you never would have had any reason to talk to, and I imagine you didn't do that. You identify differently in America and don't feel Christian. You feel whatever you feel. And Zev, also, you talked about how Jewish you feel here and how comfortably goy you feel in Israel. You feel like you said you feel Gentile there. So I just think that's kind of interesting. But it makes me wonder about this value of particularism and universalism, because I heard it a little differently, and since we're all with our own identities. And you elaborated a little. You said it had to do with the singularity of Jewishness. And I think a lot of Jews, at least when I think of why somebody would feel that their Jewishness is related to why Judaism and humanism are related is you can be expressive of yourself as a person in your particularness, but it makes you related to other people also because everybody has some particularness. Everybody is unique in some way. And I don't know if you, as a person with Cajun background, for instance,
well, I would certainly never say the more
in your Cajunness, do you feel more American? It's that. So I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get you to talk a little more about where you're coming from and what it feels like to be who you are.
In trying to understand me early on in our relationship, Zev, being a Jewish nationalist, tried to turn me into a Cajun nationalist. I think that was his way of trying to understand me. He certainly couldn't turn me into a German nationalist because that would present a whole other problem. Although, because my last name is German, I've tended to think of myself more as German than as French Cajun. I'm not a Cajunist. I'm not a tribal person. I mean, I don't think it would particularly matter what I had been born. I'm not ashamed of the Cajuns. We got great food and good music and have a lot of fun. There's nothing bad about it. I don't, to me the world is big. You should see as much of it as interests you and choose from it the best of it. I mean, I see myself more or less as an internationalist, as somebody who has chosen a set of values for myself based on my experience of the world, and not on the particular circumstances of my birth. And that's, to me, and for me, it's a natural way to be, and for the world, it seems to me, a healthy way to be. It seems to me there would be more peace if more people felt that way. To get to your phrase about the more Judaism, the more humanity, perhaps I didn't understand it. I'm not sure I still understand it, but if that's true, then the less Judaism, the less humanity. So what does that mean? You have to get to humanism through Judaism? I don't think so.
But
I resent the implication.
But can you understand that people, everybody comes from somewhere, so whatever you feel, you don't have to feel, you still have to be who you are, as you yourself said. You want to be authentic.
Right.
You didn't use that language, but you did say you want to be, you want to be who you are. Well,
right.
I want to be who I am, and I'm Jewish, and that makes me as much a person in the world as anybody. So that's where I understand that sentiment coming from. I don't know what anybody else feels about it. I'm just expressing how it can be understood a little differently than that, just to sort of probe this a bit more.
Right. I mean, I think there's also an issue here of, minorities or people who have been oppressed or persecuted are allowed to think a certain way about themselves that majorities are not allowed to think of
themselves.
That's
what I think. I think that's a really interesting thing to explore more, because most of us come from at least what had been a disadvantaged minority that's maybe now a more comfortable minority. And
I think if you were sitting in a Christian, congregation and someone said, the more Christianity, the more humanity, you would have a reaction to that.
Yeah.
Black people are allowed to make jokes about white people, and white people aren't allowed to make jokes about black people. Women are allowed to make jokes about men, and men aren't allowed to make jokes about women. I had, the particular and very singular experience, relatively speaking, of being a minority as a non-Jew living in a Jewish state in Israel. And so that has given me permission to, to talk about Jews and Judaism and make jokes about Jews and Judaism, which of course Jews do anyway. I wouldn't make those jokes to my non-Jewish friends.
Lisa, back to question.
Actually, a comment. I learned a great deal here. I mean, this was fascinating to me. I learned about a completely different Israel from the one that I grew up in and have been living ever since. If I may become personal for a moment, my son-in-law is the grandson of a gypsy, and my brother-in-law is the son of a German mother, and his daughter-in-law is a French woman who came to Israel. I lived for 41 years in a kibbutz which had, about 15 or 20 non-Jews in it, still has, including a Japanese and a couple of Russians and a Pole and a French woman and so on. So it's completely strange, I must say. It's very real what you said and very convincing, but it's a different kind of feeling. I too am a Jewish nationalist. But I spent a year as I told Harry just now, I spent a year in an Anglo-Catholic monastery because I didn't know anything about Christianity. I wanted to learn something. And when Ilana and I come to this country, we usually stay in the private home of a Catholic nun who is a very close friend of ours. And I'm a Jewish nationalist. And I don't see any contradiction between that and universalism. In fact, I think that humanity is made up of tribes and herds, not because we choose to live that way, but because these are basic human instincts. And so when we try to belong to something, and it's okay if we don't, as far as I'm concerned. But you see, this idea of internationalism, the kind of a Cloud 59 idea of an abstract humanity, doesn't work. It doesn't work. Universalism and general human ethics and universalist ethics works when they are channeled through the ethnic communities, basically. Now, when they are not channeled, that's fine. That's perfect. But that will always apply only to a small minority of people. And the difference between America and Europe or Israel, and there's a very important difference, is that if you were living in this kind of a society, America would disintegrate. It would disintegrate. You can't have nationalities in America. You can only have one nation, one society. An American society that is a mixture of all kinds of things, but increasingly, you see, you can also be part of an ethnic group within that general concept. That is impossible in Europe and other places. What David said when he teaches Holocaust, he talks about non-Jewish Germans? I don't know. I talk about Germans. Not in a negative way necessarily, because the Germans thought of themselves as Germans and the Jews in their midst as Jews. This is not the way Americans think. This is not the way American Jews live. This is a new phenomenon of the past, I don't know how many decades. And it's fascinating because it can coexist with this ethnicity. You see, my nightmare is that a country like India, where they have only over 200 ethnicities, should become ethnic. It will disintegrate. Hopefully it will take on the American model. But Israel can't. It cannot. No way. And so the only way out I can see is to listen very carefully to the Lisas of this world. Very, very carefully. And take the implied critique that she made our own critique of ourselves.
Okay.
Zev said that he's actually more comfortable being with American Gentiles than with American Jews. Now, you've experienced both Israeli Jews and American Jews. You live in New York. So my question to you is, having experienced both, which do you prefer?
Israeli Jews versus American Jews? That's my choice? Yeah.
Say your microphone isn't working.
I'm afraid it's Israelis, and I'll tell you why. Because you don't have to, with Israelis, you don't have to have so many conversations about Jewishness.
That's true. That's the normal.
You know, it's a selfish answer. After a while, it gets boring for someone who's not a Jew. You know, Israelis, on the other hand, you know, you have to have a lot of conversations about, you know, the conflict. But you have those conversations with American Jews as well. I must say that I'm quite comfortable generally with Jews. I'm not, you know, more or less comfortable among Jews than among Gentiles, but I don't anymore feel myself to be in any way, you know, like I said, I'm not a Jew, but I'm Jewish. And I accept that.
We have time for one more question from a panelist.
Sure, and I just want to clarify something that I said. When I say that I'm more, in some ways, more comfortable with, let's say, a Southern Christian audience, I meant really, what I'm really talking about is during wartime and on this issue, not culturally in general. There are certain ways in which Lisa said before that I do also appreciate people who aren't bound up in their ethnicity and expect me to be bound up in it as well. But specifically on the issue of America since 9/11, that's what I was really referring to.
Todd.
I just want to make one comment. I think Lisa said something very important, and that is she really captured, in fact, what was meant by the earlier Zionist ideologues by the notion of the normalization of the Jewish people. And that is, if you read Nordau, who was very perceptive on these things and talking about the situation of Western Jews, Jews who were acculturated but not really accepted in their societies, and who were perpetually stewing about what their position was, that situation was supposed to be alleviated. And you referred precisely to that. That is the advantage of living in an all-Jewish country, and that's what Nordau was talking about, and others as well. It's a perfect example that you gave.
One more, and then we'll.
I think from both the presentations, the question that was somewhat addressed, but I want to push a little further, is what are you guys going to do with your kids? Zev, you spoke a bit about how you both spoke about how you sort of they think of themselves as Jewish, but what about the nationality piece? You're American. Are you Israeli? I mean, I'm trying to think of it.
Hello? Nationality, by which you mean citizenship.
Whatever.
In Israel, it means something different. Zev is both an American and an Israeli. I am only an American, and the children have both. And, you know, they were both born in Jerusalem, and that was very natural, and it was very important to Zev that they be Israeli. There's a part of me that really worries what's going to happen when they turn 18. Are they going to want to go in the Israeli army? And that, you know, no mother, even an Israeli mother, particularly looks forward to that. But that's the situation.
One of the reasons I ask is I think the issues of minorities and majorities and trying to navigate what we call two-ness, having different parts of your identity, is something your kids will certainly have with regard to their parental origins. And it may not be around religion, but it will be around that they have different citizenship options, let's say, and you know, they have different attitudes about, different feelings about anything else. In that regard, every marriage is an intermarriage. You know, you're going to be negotiating something, and the kids have to navigate two-ness in some domain, and I'm just
Right.
pointing that out here.
Right now, they're confused. They don't know the difference between a Jew and an Israeli. They have, they're just not old enough to understand the difference between. Well, Jewishness, I mean, of course, it goes beyond religion and it gets into ethnicity, and they're already too young for any of those concepts. But they do have in their rooms both an American flag and an Israeli flag. They look forward to going back to Israel next summer. I think that they will, just as they've developed a Jewish identity, they will develop an Israeli identity. And the only reason I have reservations about that, again, is that I don't want to find myself apart from them.
Thank you. We are at the hour for luncheon. I think you know what to do. We want to be back here by 1. I would pay a lot of money to have the aisle seat next to the window in the middle seat with those two when they fly home to New York today. Lisa, thank you very, very much.